Hello everyone, welcome to Cloud World. My name is Santiago. So following on the last video, today we'll be following with the Kubernetes series, and in this case, since we already have everything set up in the Kubernetes side, we have the managed identity, we have the ACR attached to the AKS cluster, we are going to be moving up to the next steps. So right now we will be deploying the consumer and the producer application that we created on previous videos, and we did some testing. In a reminder, what we did with the consumer and producer is that we connected our resources into the AKS cluster with the service bus, and we were able to put messages into the service bus, and we had another application that was consuming those messages. So today, following a part of that work, we are going to deploy the new images for the consumer and the producer to the ACR. After that, we will be deploying both the consumer and the producer to AKS. And finally, we will play a little bit with the kubectl tool in order to make some testing, to explore the logs and see that everything is working properly. So with that in hand, let's get started. So for the first step that we are going to be doing, let's deploy the consumer application. So as usual, we have a Docker file that is part of our solution in this case, and each project is going to have its unique Docker file. In this case, the consumer has a very simple Docker file, which is actually just a basic steps using the .NET images that are already available publicly throughout the Docker Hub. So this is going to take our code, is going to compile it, and is going to publish it. So if you remember, the consumer is just a console application in short terms that is actually deployed as a background service, nothing too fancy. So let's go into the terminal and let's use the AC tools in order to compile our image. So if you remember, we have been using the ACR build command in order to build the image without any requirements from our local environment. So as a quick reminder, when we use this tool instead of Docker or Podman, we use the Azure resources to build our image. So that means an agent in the Azure side is going to take our code, which is going to be uploaded to the code temporarily, and it's going to compile that code and store that image in the Azure ACR. So before we do the compile, let's take a look what we already have in the ACR repository, just using once more the ACR repository list, and we are going to be listing everything that is located in our ACR. So everything should be empty by now. We don't have any images into the Azure side in the ACR. So let's build the first one. So currently my terminal is at the root of the solution. So you just need to be in there as well. So let's begin with the consumer image. Let's start building this one. So this might take a few seconds until the code gets uploaded and everything has been compiled. So we'll be back in a few. Okay, not after more than a few minutes, like 2 minutes. We already have our image into the ACR. So everything has been completed properly, and as you can see, using the Docker agent into the Azure side, everything is been done completed. So let's take a look now into the repository list once more, and we should have the image for the consumer located in this side. So as you can see, we have the consumer app, which is actually the name that we gave to our command in here as the image name. So let's go back into Rider and take a look into the deployment. So right now what we are going to do is to deploy this application into the Kubernetes cluster. So as usual, we have a deployment. The name is going to be consumer app. It's going to be located in the same namespace that we created in previous sessions, Azure Labs. And for the selector, we are going to have also the consumer app. But the most important thing is that we are going to be using the Azure Workload identity to access the resources. So if we take a look once more to the app settings to our application, which is going to be deployed with the container, we see that we have only the name of our service bus, and we are not providing any keys or anything similar to access the service bus, just the namespace. As you remember, the service account Azure Labs SA is going to be the one connecting to the managed identity throughout the federated credential to exchange tokens throughout the webhook that is already exposed in the AKS cluster too. So if you want to learn more about that, I suggest you to come back into the previous videos where we covered that topic. Now the most important part is that since we already created the consumer app image into the ACR, we just need to provide the name of the ACR and the name of the image that we would like to work on. So if we take a look into the Azure portal and we refresh our ACR, we will see we have the consumer app in here. So with these changes at hand, we just can go into the terminal and we can apply the changes required just to deploy our application. So once more, we will be leveraging the kubectl tooling to apply the changes in this case, and we are going to be working in this case with the consumer, like I said. So we will be using the deployment YAML that I just showed you. Let's apply the changes. This is pretty simple as well. So one important trick that I would like to show you prior moving to the next part is that on the previous video we usually set up manually the namespace each time we executed a query. We can simplify those kind of things just using the kubectl config set context current and send the namespace to Azure Labs. So any query that you execute after this line is going to be executed against the namespace that you are assigning in here. So let's take a look into the deployment. So as you can see, we have the consumer app that was created no more than 30 seconds ago. And if we take a sneak peek into the consumer app, we will see a couple of very interesting things into the console. So let's clear this very quickly. Let's take the logs for this one. And let's take a look into the pods first, so we can get we can get the proper logs. So this is the pod that we are going to explore. So let's use once more the kubectl get log. kubectl logs, and let's access the logs into the pod. One of the most interesting things that you will notice in here is that we are getting some basic information from the Masal library, which is the one that is interacting with the Azure Service Bus throughout the code. So as you can see, it's requesting parameters using the webhook to the Azure Service Bus to make exchange to the token using the default Azure credential what we set up in the previous videos. So when we log this kind of information initially, we will get information about the logs and the authentication. We can see if maybe it was a successful or was actually a failure. So let's take a look once more into the pod. And everything is running. We have one replica, so everything looks good. So let's do exactly the same thing for the producer. Now let's take a look what we have in the producer side. So this is actually pretty simple in this case. We have also the image that we need to build, and also we have a Docker file as the previous step. So let's go back into the terminal and let's comply with the first requirement, that is building the image that is required in this case for the producer. So if we go into the console, we can execute the query as well, ACR build, provide the name of the registry, and in this case the image that we are going to be creating will be the producer API. And once more we specify the Docker file. So let's give it a minute or two in order to finish this part, and we will be back in a moment. So now the producer compiling also has been completed successfully in the Azure portal. And if we also take a sneak peek into the browser, we will be able to see that we have the new producer API image in here. Also, if we take a look into the console and if we execute once more the ACR repository list and provide the name of our ACR, we can see we have the two images ready to go. So let's take a look into the IDE. So a couple of things that I would like to highlight about this Docker file is that we are exposing two ports, because if you remember, the producer is an API. So usually for APIs, throughout the default images that Microsoft provide, we usually expose the port 8080 and 8081 for HTTP and HTTPS protocol when available. It is actually pretty important to keep in mind which ports actually our container is actually exporting or exposing to the end application, because those come pretty handy when we are building the Kubernetes application. So if we take a look into the YAML, we have exactly the same structure as the consumer. Nothing has changed. The only piece that is actually different is the name of the image. In this case, is the producer API. And one of the important things that we will be highlighting in here as well is that we are also saying which ports in the container are available. So in this case, we are going to be exposing the 8080, which is the HTTP, and we are saying that we are using the TCP protocol in order to expose this particular part of the API. So let's apply also this producer part so we can deploy these changes into the AKS cluster. So let's go back into the terminal. So once more, let's use the apply file, and in this case we will be applying the producer and also the deployment YAML that we just saw. So let's apply this one. Once more, let's execute the get deployment just to make sure everything is running properly. The API is also as well. So let's take a look also into the pods. Okay, everything is good. We have one pod for each one of the applications. So if we also take a look into this pod for the producer API, we will see we have some basic information. By now, we don't have anything related to the Masal library because we haven't made any request to connect to any of the Azure resources. We will see that in a moment. So now let's explore a trick, because everything is deployed into the AKS cluster. For the consumer is actually perfectly fine, because that is an application that is not exposed to the internet. So today in this video we will see a very neat trick that as a developers we can use in order to access locally a service that is deployed into the AKS as a deployment and doesn't have yet a service on an ingress layer accessible throughout the internet. So let's take a look. So our application for the producer API is exposed into the AKS cluster, and if you remember and you can see on screen, we have the port 8080 exposed to our application. kubectl provide a very handy command, which is the port forward, in which I can tell the kubectl to select one particular type of object. It could be a single port or it could be a deployment. In this case, we will be exposing the deployment, and in this case, of course, it's going to be the producer API. We are going to tell him in here in which port in our local environment, in this case the 4200, is going to be mapped into the port 8080 that is exposed to this deployment. Remember, this port in the left can be any value that you would like to use. In this case for today we are using the 42000. So when you execute this command successfully, it will take a few seconds to connect, but then it's going to tell us that the connection has been forwarded to the local host. Okay, now as you can see in the terminal, we have forwarded the implementation. The port 8080 has been exposed in the port 4200 in our local host. So let's take a look into the browser and let's try to access the port 442, and let's access directly the Swagger page. So as you can see, throughout the local host in this port 4200, we can access the Swagger list, and we have the producer in this case that we have in the previous example. The consumer that is deployed into the AKS at this moment is set up to listen into the topic that was exposed throughout the billing. But in order to test this properly, let's connect very quickly to the consumer via the terminal as well, so we can see one of the logs that we usually see when the message arrives to the producer, to the consumer. Okay, so let's connect into the consumer just to make sure that we can see any logs that go throughout the application. For this, we'll be using the logs one more, but in this case we are going to be using the parameter f just to make sure that any logs that comes throughout the application are being tracked in real time. So let's grab the consumer ID of one of our pods and let's connect into it. So as you can see, we have the previous messages that we already have before. And what we are going to see right now is that when we set a message throughout the producer, the consumer is going to take those. So let's go back into the browser for a second. And in this case, let's process the order ID 1000 and process of the billing ID number 5. Let's execute this message in here. So as you can see, we already have a status of sent. So if we go back into the terminal, we should see the output pretty soon. So as you can see, we already got the message in here, order ID 1000 and with billing ID number 5. Let's go in and execute another example just for the sake of the demo. So in this case, let's execute a 5000 and the billing ID is going to be 500. I'm going to go back into the console and I'm going to execute it right now so you can see it more real time. So as you can see, we already got the message processing here with the billing ID 500 and the order ID 5000. So well, as you can see, we already deploy our consumer and our producer to the AKS cluster, and we are able to consume those messages from the service bus. Everything is fully safer with the managed identity, and we don't have to provide any keys. So far, we can say deploying this application into AKS, we are following the best practices on security standards that Azure has to offer. So in the next video, we will be following into this demo, most probably. And in this case, we are going to be getting together an Azure function that is going to consume also the service bus messages. We are going to be deploying this Azure function also to Azure, and then we are going to be taking down the consumer from the AKS cluster. But the producer is going to stay. And we will see that we also can easily process messages from a service bus topic or queue using Azure functions. So thank you for joining me in this video, and see you in the next one.